Hello, and thank you very much for joining us on this Joy News exclusive. So today we're speaking with one man who spent 35 years of his life serving our dearest country, Ghana. For many of you, you know him as Tarzan and probably will remember him for his work at the Volta River Authority, or maybe his days with the United Ghana movement, I do not know. But in 1988, he was energy advisor to the government. And in his own words, that was the most fulfilling job. Our guest is Dr. Charles Wereko-Brobby, who has turned 70 years. Long time, you're looking very young, if I could put it that way.
Well, thanks for the compliment. I'm not sure whether I look very young,
Well, compared to your age?
Most people, well, that's, when people see you, they say, often refer to as da or old man, so maybe for you, it's a good compliment. But I'm blessed.
You are blessed indeed. And I mean, you were born in March, Independence Month, I think. I mean, it's not far-fetched if I say Happy Independence Day to you.
I will observe the Independence Day, but unfortunately, it's not a happy one, and I don't think it's been happy for a long time.
Why?
Because on Independence Night, our first leader said he were to demonstrate that the black man was capable of managing their own affairs. And over my lifetime, I think we've done anything but that. So we have become back to neo-colonialist dependency. And we talk in terms of what our colonial masters can do for us, not in terms of what we can do for ourselves. So yes, it's good to be independent, but what does independent mean? It means that you have told somebody who was superintendent over you, I can do it all myself now. But that's not what we see.
You're saying we've not shown that we're capable of managing our own affairs?
I don't think we have not shown. It is clear. I mean, everything we do, we are dependent on so-called development partners who, in effect, prop up everything that we do. So it's not a question of, I don't need to convince anybody that we have not shown. It's very clear.
We'll get into your public life. I mean, we'll start from when you were energy advisor and everything that you did. But since we're talking about independence briefly, there are those who feel that based on some of the things that you've said, there was even no need to organize a celebration on the day. Do you agree with them?
I think it's a day that we should always mark, but how we mark it is subject to debate. I don't, going back on my belief that we should use each occasion each year to see how far down the road we've gone towards managing our own affairs. I think just repeating the colonial mantra of exercising and saluting and paraphernalia, and it doesn't really do anything for us as a nation.
So what would have been the best way to mark it for you?
Like I said, we should use this as a period. We have a national National
Commission on Civic Education.
Yeah, I think we should use these occasions to reflect on how far we've come as a nation, which areas we are good at, which areas we are deficient at, how do we improve. More importantly, try to develop a Ghanaian attitude to things. See, unfortunately, too many things have now become politically dependent and driven. And so we don't see and think and do what is best for the Ghanaian nation.
Okay. Let's look at your days. Let's get into your, public life. You've been energy advisor to government. You've been CEO of Volta River Authority. You've been CEO of Ghana at 50 Secretariat. Let's start with 1988 when you became energy advisor to government. And growing up, the first time I heard that was when my father told me that, oh, Wereko-Brobby, he was energy advisor to government in the 80s when he had returned from the UK.
Yes.
Yes. So,
in fact, that's what brought me back home.
Good.
You know, I had been in the UK for about 20 years studying and working. But somebody who was fortunate enough to have a government scholarship to go abroad and study energy, it was always in my mind that the return home was what was best. So in '88 I came back. I actually met some Ghanaians at some workshops I had organizing, and they said that they were in dire need of help. So I said, okay, I was working at the time for the Commonwealth Secretariats, and I actually quit my job and then came back home to assist. But as energy advisor, I think the main thing was there was a vehicle called the National Energy Board, which had been set up then to be the main vehicle for developing the country's energy policy and institutions, and also providing useful advice to the Minister of Energy. And although people sort of associate and talk more about my stint with VRA because of sensationalism, but the time of the Energy Board for me was the most fulfilling, both professionally and also in terms of effectiveness towards the country.
Why was that the most fulfilling professionally and effectiveness towards the country?
Well, first of all, going back on what drives me, this whole thing of looking after and managing to run our own affairs. I was asked by the secretary then, Mr. Acquah, who said to me that, look, they had set up an energy board and they had actually were providing taxpayers' money for it, but it didn't seem to be going anywhere. So he wanted somebody to come and reset the whole thing as intended. And for me, that was a very good challenge, because there he was saying, look, if he didn't achieve what they intended, he was prepared to close down the institution. And for me, that was the challenge, because there was about 100 young Ghanaian engineers mainly who had committed themselves to developing this energy framework and resources for this country. And I felt that if we allowed it to go down the tube, it would be unfortunate. So the challenge was to make sure that we turn it around and turn those Ghanaians who had committed themselves to the sector into very useful things, and also do something good for Ghana. So at the end of the exercise, I mean, I think of not only had we increased the manpower size, but of about 150 people, I think we only lost 1 or 2 to go and see greener pastures elsewhere. And most of them spent their whole professional career and are still in the energy sector of Ghana today. So I'm very pleased about that.
How was it at the time, working for the country? And if you look at it today, what's the difference?
I think the difference is that the focus on what works best for Ghana. So everybody in every meeting and every discussion and every action was what is best for Ghana. Today it pretends to be working for Ghana, but it's seen through a political prism. How does my party get to look good first, and then what looking good does for Ghana is a secondary point. So that's a big difference between then and today. Of course, I must admit, I mean, that was a period of, if you like, the non-democratic rule. So, of course, one needs to look at the issue of freedoms and ability to choose your own leader, etc., etc. But for me as a professional, we never got into any discussions about what politics anybody believes in, and people were actually promoted on merit, not on fidelity.
Now, as a professional, were you giving the free hand to operate?
Well, I must say, to be quite frank, Mr. Acquah is the best quasi, well, at the time, political stroke minister I've ever had. I mean, he gave me total freedom to think technically, and was not afraid to look at what I did and disagree with it when he did disagree. But it was there's very little disagreement. He allowed me to tell him professionally what I thought should happen, and then he would look at it and either go with it or say, look, yes, this is professionally correct, but there's also a political dimension. And so for me, that's the kind of politician. And I remember sometimes you come and say, oh, A, B, and C say you are taking the limelight, and he would tell them, listen, that's what he's supposed to be doing. Because they knew that if the technical part of their ministry and the objectives were achieved, then did the glory reflect on them.
Okay, so let's look at the next thing. So within that period, what were some of the achievements? What were some of the things that you did?
I think apart from the capability development, that's when we embarked on what for me is the, if you ask me to rank my successes in Ghana, would be number one. In 1989, we set up a national electrification project.
In 89?
In 89, to start from 1990, for which over a period of 30 years was to electrify the whole of Ghana by moving Ghana from electricity access of then 15%, concentrated mainly in Accra, Kumasi, and Tema, to a nationwide access of about 90%, of 100% actually. But after 30 years, we've reached about 90% of that, and that for me is the most satisfying part. And then of course, that's when we introduced things like street lighting levy, the national electrification levy, because at the time we found out that donors will provide 85% of the funding, and then the government will not make money available. So the levy came from that one. And then we found out that, look, street lights were not there. So from the point of view of protection of the populace, we should try to let government provide the lights, but we should pay for the maintenance of the lights. Then we had a rural electrification levy to support the national electrification program. And then we said, well, if you're trying to take electricity to everywhere, why don't we make sure that people at least can enjoy it? So that was the dawn of the genesis of lifeline tariff. You know, so we said, okay, for 50 units, you can have a radio, you can have a fridge, you can have a little television, and it will not cost you all that much. So that was where lifeline tariffs came from. Unfortunately, many of those things now have now been bottled down into this so-called ESLA bond. So that's why Ghana is relatively dark now, because the money for street lights is not being used for street light maintenance. And then the other thing was 30 years, in the run-up to the Rio Earth Summit, I don't know if you know about those things, that was when we started talking climate change, and then the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was established at the Rio Earth Summit. But in the run-up to it, we realized that, especially when we ramped up the refinery capacity, we were flaring a lot of LPG as the byproduct. And so we decided to establish a national LPG program, whereby we would turn the LPG that was being flared into cooking fuel to replace charcoal and firewood. And so at the domestic level, we then started this program where we're even, right from the word go, we're delivering cylinders to homes, and what people are now calling recirculation was done from then. You didn't own cylinders, the state owned it, and then you just took it. And then at the time, all public institutions, secondary schools, and public institutions like the police, the council, and things, were all converted from cooking with firewood to cooking with LPG.
Wow.
So long before we started talking about net zero, we had started this exercise. But unfortunately, whilst we were doing the program, some political decisions marred it. Because
what are those decisions?
Well, so suddenly what happened was we're doing very nicely mopping up the gas for cooking. And somebody said, oh, but we can also use the gas for powering cars, which is, true. But the issue is that we are producing petrol, and LPG is coming as a byproduct from the production of petrol. So if you start then substituting the petrol with the LPG, you are creating a problem. And unfortunately, that problem was to lead to so many challenges for the national LPG program, because suddenly we ran out of LPG. We were having to import quite expensively, and the real thing that made the whole program work was that because it was a byproduct, we could give it away at a very, very cheap price.
Cheap price, yeah.
And but once people started to use it for vehicles, then we had to then start introducing taxes on it like we do for gasoline and things like that. So unfortunately, today as we speak, that problem of dual use of LPG has not actually been resolved. And you'll be surprised to know that LPG now for vehicles constitute probably 50 or more % of LPG use in this country. So from a policy perspective, we need to really address the issue of whether LPG is for cooking or LPG must be used for transportation, or all these adverts and promotions that are going. You cannot sustain a policy where LPG is competing with gasoline for cars. And then of course we set up BOST. It was meant to ensure that at any moment in time we had 3 months storage of fuel, so that when we get into unforeseen things like the Russia, Ukraine and things like that, at least you have about 3 months to resolve your problems that may come up from instant world issues such as wars and other things like that. But and then we built all the tanks in various parts of the country, right up to Tamale, and we even had a pipeline which could pump products around the country. It started at a refinery and went all the way to Atimpoku, and then we could carry products along the lake. Okay. Unfortunately, all that infrastructure and even the whole idea of strategic storage is gone a different way, unfortunately.
How does that make you feel when you look back and realize that some of all these wonderful ideas are no longer being implemented?
They were not ideas; they were actually implemented.
Yes, I mean,
yes,
these wonderful programs.
Well, it doesn't. I'm saying that now people are more interested in political things. It is a major problem of sustainability. We look at things and we don't think of why we did it. We think of what political advantage we can gain from it. So now, even though we started from the word go, taxing the petrol consumer for us to buy the strategic store, today, I don't think I've got any strategic storage in the tanks, even though that was the purpose. And the irony, you'll be surprised to know that the first consultant I used in the development of the bus project was a young man called Kenoforiata.
Oh, really? The current finance minister?
The current finance minister.
What rule was the time?
Oh, they had just come back from America and they set up data bank, and they were also providing economic advice, not economic, but economic feasibility and studies and things like that, as part of their capabilities.
And so you used to?
Yeah, because it is always I was very, very particular on making sure that we promoted Ghanaian talent. So for the electrification project, for example, even though we're using a lot of foreign contractors because of the funding sources, I always made sure that they partnered with Ghanaian engineering companies to ensure that the capability was developed here. So, and in fact, I remember when one of the first things I did when I assumed position, it was under a World Bank United Nations sponsored activity. I told the sponsor that I did not want any foreign consultants to be brought into Ghana anymore. And so then there was a very good group in Ghana called the Energy Research Group, which was basically fathered by Professor Alote. And so we used the opportunity of the project I was working on to develop a lot of the energy capability in this country, which is still very strong.
Interesting. We're still talking to Dr. Charles Wereko-Brobby, but let's look at your, post-energy,
yes.
Yes, energy advice,
Yes, when democracy came, the Fourth Republic came in 93, I said that I did not want to be part of the transition, the dropping of the P from the PNDC to become the NDC. So we parted ways but I spent the next maybe 8 years of my life doing agitation and propagation of what I called deepening democracy and ensuring that the Fourth Republic.
Alliance for Change.
Well, that was only one of them. Yes, the Alliance for Change was one of them, but the most significant work was my work in the media. Firstly, to ensure that we got broadcasting pluralism in Ghana. I don't know whether you're old enough to remember that the first three republics of Ghana only had the state monopoly of DBC. And so I felt that you couldn't talk about multi-party democracy without the voters being able to decide on whether Wilson was the best candidate or his ideas were the best. So for me, liberal democracy and multi-party democracy was a twin of a plural media.
Okay.
So that was the reason why we fought and pushed hard to establish pluralism. The interesting thing was that in every constitution in Ghana, pluralism had been technically allowed, it was there. But how do you make it real? So I think trying to make it real was, for me, what we needed. And now we have maybe, 400 odd stations. And we have very good quality private broadcasting. Note, I didn't say independent, I said private broadcasting, because government still controls the media landscape in Ghana.
You don't think the media landscape is independent?
It's not independent. No,
Why?
it is free, but it's not independent.
What would make it independent?
Well, by UNESCO definition, if you are independent, you are independent of government control.
You're talking about why you think the media in Ghana is not independent. Yes, according to UNESCO.
It's not a thinking. You see, if you look at our constitution, chapter 12, the reason the National Media Commission was set up was to be an independent regulator of the media. When the Fourth Republic came, especially after we established Radio I, the Minister of Information then said that a law will be passed which will give power to the NMC to regulate the media. Unfortunately, when that law was passed, the power to decide who could own media in Ghana or who could operate and regulate it was given to the NCA, the National Communications Authority. Now, the NCA is an organization that is technically competent because of its management of frequencies. But you can't ask it to also decide who should have radio stations because the NCA is under a government and literally under a minister. So, as long as the NCA would decide who could go on radio and it still has that power, then you are not independent of government. You see, as we sit here, and unfortunately, politicians have abused this in deciding who gets the media and in thinking that if they give radio stations to people or companies or entities that they favor, that it will help their cause. But it's been proven over 25, 26, 28 years that it does not help. But what we need to do is to amend the law to make sure that the National Media Commission is the regulator. You see, sometimes when you get problems in the media, everybody runs to the National Media Commission and say, why aren't you doing anything? The reality is that if you've taken the power away from National Media Commission, why do you expect it to be able to tame and regulate the media when it has no power?
Okay.
And then, you know, you get ministers of state threatening to shut down radio stations because they don't like what they are saying. Or, you know, that is the job of the National Media Commission.
Okay.
And if you read chapter 12, it is stated the membership of the commission, in fact, is the only national institution that whose membership is defined to letter in the Constitution.
Sure. Great. So let's look at your days at Volta River Authority. You said because of the sensationalism, a lot of people remember you most with that. How was it like at the Volta River Authority?
Oh, I think it was I think, again, it was very, very useful, both in terms of professional performance and also even in dealing with staff issues. But it was too short-lived to really see it as a major part of my public life. But the important thing is that there are two significant things that I would want to bring out. Firstly, for the first time and only time in Ghana's history, there was no doomsday under my tenure. Because when I walked through the door, I said to my staff and to all my colleagues, I'm not here to manage load shedding. I'm here to keep the lights on. And fortunately, we managed to keep the lights on despite the fact that there were so many little other things. The other thing was that for the first time, we had been so used to the World Bank and other donors funding the major power sector development projects for generation and transmission, etc. I said no. But we were trying to ensure that we didn't get doomsday, and we had a very major transmission project which needed to be funded and put into place very quickly. And the World Bank was pussyfooting with us with issues of the environment and paying compensation and people getting money and misbehaving. Anyway, the long and the short of it is that I went to my board and I said, listen, we spend about $10 million every month buying crude oil. The project that we have been waiting for, or you have been waiting for over 20 years for the World Bank to support, is actually only costing $8 million.
Whoa.
So why can't we support and pay for this project and let the engineers in VRA, who are very capable, actually supervise the building of this transmission line? So if you hear of the Prestia to Obuasi transmission line,
yes,
It was funded fully by VRA, and its construction was supervised by VRA engineers from the beginning to the end, and it was delivered below cost and on time. And so for me, again, we demonstrated. It's a confidence building measure, because all the time we had developed a very competent engineering capability, but it was playing a support role to foreign consultants. So when the projects came, they would come with their foreign consultants, and then they would, our engineers who were really doing the work would be supporting. So again, under my philosophy of proving that we can manage, that to me were the two highlights of my stay there, notwithstanding the other things that attracted ridiculous publicity.
And talking about the things that attracted, ridiculous publicity, a lot of agitations there. Some worker agitations against you.
Well, the worker agitations were, in my view, and as several investigations proved, they did not amount to anything. There wasn't any proof of anything. Let me tell you what happened. When I stepped into VRA, it was very clear from the level of the lake that if we didn't do anything, there was going to be doom so. So we started actually getting something which we called the strategic reserve plant, so that when we reached the time when the lake was off, we could run power to support the grid. That was used as a route to try and develop a workers' agitation, not by the workers themselves, because when you go to VRA today, they will tell you that the period of my tenure at VRA was the best for workers in terms of benefits, etc., etc. But other people were trying to, both political and technical, were trying to use them to prosecute their own ends. But for me, it didn't really matter.
How was it working with, the Ghana at 50 secretariats?
Well, again, the Ghana at 50 secretariats came out of, we had said we were going to celebrate 50 years of independence. I remember at the time the Malaysians had actually set up a secretariat 5 years before, and we had about 9 months to go to the celebrations. And originally, the person who was supposed to be in charge of the celebrations was Ambassador Kato, who was one of Ghana's finest diplomats that we have ever produced. But because he was such a fine diplomat, he was posted to London as the High Commissioner. And so we had a vacuum, and I said to the then Chief of Staff, I think, I could handle this. It's a managerial matter, not any technical matter. So that was how the Chief of Staff said to me, listen, we don't want any institutional encumbrances for the work you are doing. So I was engaged by the government as a consultant and given the freedom to establish and engage and employ people to work for the Secretariat as I determined their competence and capability. And again, what I said to everybody was, listen, the 6th of March 2007 is not an event that can be postponed. So whatever you do, we must meet that target there and make sure that we do it. But I felt that we needed to not just march, but we needed to look at some of the things, 50 years of our independence, what are some of the issues that we had not really done so well with, and some of the things that we had done well with. So it wasn't just a marching thing. We had 12 months of full activities, lectures, debates, plays, infrastructural development. When you hear of Jubilee Parks, and you hear of Jubilee House, and you hear anything to do with Jubilee. Those were the things that came out of the Ghana 50 celebrations.
And post that, I remember a whole commission of inquiry to investigate a lot of things.
But yeah,
it didn't. Yes, I know what happened with that. But at the period, I mean, now that we are talking about your public life, at the period, going through all of these with a perceived embezzlement of funds at the time, which after everything, calmed down. How was it like?
I did not actually. In fact, I think one of the things that egged a lot of people was that I said, look, we have 9 months to develop a product. You can't spend every day of your life answering spurious charges about whether you were misspending the money or whatever it was. So I actually deliberately decided not to bother, because I was confident that there was no misuse of money, and at any rate, I didn't want to get involved in the political game at the time, because a lot of this was being promoted by the opposition politicians, and also even politicians within the ruling party who thought that I was a law unto myself. But I just said, no, we must follow the rules. But the important thing, and I really remember, at the time I said to everybody that I was going to spend the money on toilets and buying cars for our visitors. Because you not believe it, Winston, I started to develop public toilets and facilities on all the major high roads in Ghana. And I remember one of your former colleagues was always making fun that we were spending 20 million just doing things. But recently, as recently as this week, I heard people talking about the fact that you drive along high roads and highways in Ghana, and if you need to pee, you have to get into the bush and all those things. The thing that made us develop Jubilee Parks was the fact that for 50 years, we had public squares for public celebrations in every region of Ghana, and there was not even a single one of them had toilets, except for Black Star Square, whose toilets were dilapidated, and then they had nowhere for guests to sit. So that was the idea behind developing the Jubilee Parks.
Great. So, post Ghana 50, you've been resting, you've been commenting on issues.
Let me just come in and say that, from about 93 to even till now, I have commentated a lot on public affairs. First as a newspaper columnist. At one time I was writing for about 6 or 7 newspapers in Ghana: the Chronicle, Crusading Guide, Triumph, which was an environmental paper, New Statesman, which was the NPP, and then later on when we went into the ICT world, also writing for My Joy Online, ICT Online.
I remember all of those.
But yes, for me, that was part of what I call the deepening of democracy in the Fourth Republic. We do not hold politicians to account in this country, even though we have a lot of media. And I felt that until we develop systems of making politicians answer for what they are doing in our name, then the democracy will take a long time to take roots. As we speak, only yesterday or the day before, we have an incredible situation of the Ghana Armed Forces going into brutalizing civilians in our country after 30 years of so-called democracy. It's a very serious problem, but nobody is taking it. And for me, what is worse is the fact that incumbent administration politicians who are in charge are trying to justify the clearly unlawful thing. But The reason, I mean, remember at the beginning of this parliament, soldiers stormed our parliament.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of pussyfooted around and didn't see the seriousness of this exercise. But we can't really celebrate or rejoice in 30 years of so-called multi-party if we have the specter that anytime they decide, the armed forces of this country can just step in and take the place of Ghana police on internal security matters. These are, so we have not made very much progress.
We're still engaging Dr. Charles Wereko-Brobby, who stands 70 years, and we're celebrating him in his public life, but also getting his thoughts on other issues of national interest, particularly our democracy. So I remember some time ago speaking to Dr. Benjamin Kumbo, and he talked about the thing we have is just more of an electoral democracy. We go to the polls, elect leaders, and that's the end of it.
And if we only do it once, you see, our democracy is surface deep, because as I wrote years ago, I said, once every 4 years, we go and choose a president and parliamentarians. That is really the end of the whole exercise. Okay, we do district exercises, but it is not multi-party or... So our exercise in democracy is not deep enough. And not only that, let me tell you what happened. When the current constitution was being written, people who should have known better boycotted the whole exercise. So we finished up with a constitution that was written written to make one person become a democratic dictator. The funny thing about it is that everybody who has succeeded that person has likes this almost total power that the Constitution grants them, with very few checks. And so there's been very little attempt to rewrite or amend the Constitution to make it more accountable. And even though we spend about $200 million doing the Constitutional Review Commission, if you read the report, it does not improve. It may improve slightly the issues of elections and all of that, but it does not do much to strengthen the issues of accountability. Because for me, people ought to know that if you read the first few words of the Constitution, we elect politicians to govern in our name, for our welfare. So Winston, if you got a contractor to do something for you, I'm sure you think that you have every right to know, have they done it well? Have they done it to cost? Have they done it as you intended? You know, so the idea of political accountability should be part and parcel of our democratic culture. But unfortunately, we have a democratic, in our constitution, a body called the NCCE, which is meant to promote and develop all these things. But because it is under the control of the sitting president, it has not been very effective in promoting democracy in this country. And we have also some of the National Development Planning Commission. The reason why so many of these development plans never work is that their development are under political control. So if the NDC government developed the 40-year development plan, the MPP government will come and develop something else or throw it on the shelf and not do anything. So we need to find a way in which the Constitution can be tweaked so that some of these institutions work for Ghana, not for the political party in power.
Okay, so let's look at, I mean, and still with our democracy, you've talked, so we know the Constitution is not fit for purpose, as you've talked about now. A lot of people who have been advocating a whole new Constitution. Is that what you believe
I
in?
think we need a new Constitution, but I believe that amending the Constitution should not be the work of any single political party, because the way politics works in Ghana now, anything that one political party drives automatically gets rejected. So I have thought about it all, and I believe, you know, and this is exclusive to you, Winston. I believe that with all the financial difficulties that Ghana is going through, coupled with the need for us to have a proper constitution that is accountable to the people, I do not believe that just going to an election to change government is going to be in Ghana's interest. And I feel what we need to do is that for the next at least 12 years or 16 years, we should promote the concept of the Great Coalition. You know, the kind of things that the Germans do when they have serious national things to get through, where the two parties actually come together and they form a coalition government and agree a program that they think will benefit the whole country. You know, please know, I didn't say united government, because we've had, that word is
union government.
Union government is bad. But we should look at the Great Coalition. And my idea is that, yes, we should go through the election so that we don't need to give a setback to the idea of competitive elections. But in my view, whoever wins the election should then be the president, but we should form a great coalition of the incumbent party, the opposition, civil society, and others who are the great and the good in the country, and first of all agree to work on making the constitution more accountable, and secondly develop the idea of the Ghanaian nation and what it needs and what works for us. So right now, whenever I hear a politician is talking, they are talking about we did this and I did that and we did it, and not about what is good for Ghana. It's, you know, trying to show off their politics, and that's what makes them go and give all these promises which don't work, and then finish up living on completed projects and all those kind of things. We should really. I don't think whoever becomes the next government, given the fact that we have had all these haircuts and the other problems to come, if we have 15 years in which we are having to deal with bringing our debt under control and our economy to straight, I don't believe simply changing government will do that, because whoever becomes the next government will have to deal with the agreements and the arrangements that are put in place for the current IMF program. And I think that they should not just come and think that because they've been elected, they should also start finding money to waste to show that they have something to do. So I really will be speaking a lot more about the idea of the Great Coalition and the fact that we should... let me actually see, well, one of the things, since we've got a debt crisis, you find a situation where, because of the present parliamentary setup, you can actually go and contract huge debts with just a one-vote majority in parliament. I believe that when Ghana is going to contract debts beyond a certain level, there should be at least a two-thirds majority agreement within parliament that the country should go and borrow this money, because we seem to forget and to blame other things, that what we are dealing with is that we have borrowed too much and we cannot pay it back sustainably. You can talk about Russia, Ukraine, and the COVID crisis, but nobody has ever told me that the money we borrowed, we spent any of it giving it to Russia or to Ukraine. So I don't see how having gotten us, both parties gotten us into very deep debts, you blame it on other things. But the reality, and I know we're in a political season, the reality is that Ghanaians ought to know that where we are at, people may have good intentions, but it will be very, very difficult for the next 10, 15 years for any particular political persuasion to move Ghana forward unless we think collectively.
And talking about thinking collectively, you know, the great coalition that you talk about, you know, yes, this would be different from the all-inclusive governments of the past, but in the past we have talked about all-inclusive governments. And one of the things you realize most of the time is that the main opposition party...
Let me tell you why the all-inclusive doesn't work. Because the all-inclusive is a slogan that still leaves the decision-making in the hands of the party that won power. You see, but if both parties together or civil society are working together, that is for me the true definition of all-inclusive.
Great. Finally, Dr. Wereko-Brobby, because of our time, we need to be wrapping it all up. But today, if you look at this country and what we have become, how does that make you feel?
It makes me very sad. You see, I did a post last week where Ghana has become the used-to-be country. Used to be the best. Used to be the best at football. Used to be the best at education. Used to be the best at... So we are a country living on past glories, you know, wallowing in nostalgia of what we were before. You know, even yesterday on the State of the Nation address, I heard somebody saying that our vaccination program used to be the envy of the world. The issue we are dealing with is not what it used to be. The issue we are dealing with is that there's a shortage of vaccine. Why is there a shortage of vaccine? Because we are promoting a very dangerous governance system in this country where our public services are not staffed by the meritorious, but are staffed by those who owe fidelity to a particular political persuasion. So we're not using the best of our talents. We are using the ones who swear allegiance to political parties. And that is where you see the deficiencies. Nice program, free SHS, but you're always dealing with food shortages. You have immunization programs, but you are dealing with vaccine shortages. So I am very sad that Black Africa's first independent country has now become the used-to-be country. We keep every football tournament. We waste a lot of money. We are going to win, but we have not won a tournament for over 40 years. You know, so we're great at talking, but very little achievements.
Dr. Charles Wereko-Brobby, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And happy birthday to you once again.
Lovely. Thanks a lot.
All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us. My name is Winston. On behalf of the team, we're grateful you're able to join us. Keep watching the Joy News channel. Bye for now.